Well, it's my hope and prayer this morning that we are all receiving a wonderful Sabbath blessing. I think it's just wonderful to be able to be in a church that worships God in spirit and in truth. You know, there are a lot of churches out there that people don't have that privilege of having that experience. But I'm glad that this church is committed to that. You know, one of the great blessings in my life in the last couple of years has been the fact that my daughter has returned to the Adventist church. You know, she left for many years, went out into the world and partied and all that. But one thing that, and she's told me a number of times, the way that she was brought up, and I always had doubts about whether I did a good job parenting or not. But she feels like, you know, a lot of what she was taught, she remembered, and so when she returned, she remembered a lot of things, and she saw some great changes in the church in her return, and so she's had some struggles, not personally, but with some of the different things that she's seen, and she's got a lot of friends that are not in the Adventist church, they belong to other churches, and but one of the early issues that Christine ran into when she returned to the church just a couple of years ago was the practice of many Christian friends from other churches that ate pretty much what they wanted to and advocated it as not only healthy but okay in the sight of God from a biblical perspective. And we're going to look at a little bit at chapter 10 of the book of Acts. And before I get into the actual what the 10th chapter is actually dealing with, we're going to look at a little bit of how some people interpret parts of that. And, you know, one of the most important things that we can do as Christians when we approach the Bible, we need to make sure that we're reading it in its context. Because we can come into the middle of a chapter and say that it's going to mean something that it really doesn't mean. But the bottom line is, if we take something out of context, we can give all kinds of distortion to it. So I'm going to focus on the issues relative to the 10th chapter of Acts and the historical significance of what happened relative to the Christian church. You know, that's a very important chapter in the Bible because it talks about, and you know, we wouldn't even be here today if that event had not happened. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But first of all, let's look at the issue of eating abominable foods, because that's the issue that most evangelicals take with the book of Acts chapter 10. You know, they talk about, you know, the eating of, the vision that Peter had. So particularly pork, which is huge in the South. Now, there was a lady and she was on Facebook, and you know, what can you tell from Facebook? But you know, you never can tell whether the arguments are just emotional or not. But she presented an argument kind of in defense of eating pork in relation to somebody that was saying that we shouldn't be eating pork. And this is what she said, and this is pretty much the attitude that you get from a lot of the evangelicals regarding, the eating of unclean animals. It's okay in the biblical perspective and that type of thing. But this is what she says: "We raised hogs until I was 23 years old, and we ate them every meal. We are already full of bugs and worms in our bodies that keep us cleaned out. If God didn't want us to eat the pig, he wouldn't have gave it to us." Now, you know, that's kind of an interesting reasoning. If it's there, God gave it to us. But same way with cows, however. Apparently he didn't know when they did their due diligence, it would break the ozone. Everything on earth has a purpose. Cannabis used in forms to relieve pain and help cure cancer is great. Using it just to get high is wrong. Same with opium. Poppies are beautiful. Then man figured out how to get high from them. Again, everything is meant for a purpose, and man always does wrong with it. And then she quotes Mark 7:14 through 19. "Then Jesus called to the crowd to come and hear. 'All of you listen,' he said, 'and try to understand. You are not defiled by what you eat, you are defiled by what you say and do.' Then Jesus went into a house to get away from the crowds, and his disciples asked him what he meant by the statement he had made. 'Don't you understand either?' he asked. 'Can't you see that what you eat won't defile you. Food doesn't come in contact with your heart, but only passes through the stomach and then comes out again. By saying this, he showed that every kind of food is acceptable. So you can see here kind of a different type of thinking on these things than we have as Seventh-day Adventists. And then she quotes Acts 10 through 15. He became hungry, speaking of Peter, and wanted something to eat. And while it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the heaven open and something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all kinds of four-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." The voice said to him again a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." Now, after this, she had quite a bit more to say, but that's all. You kind of get the idea of where she was going with this. And that's where most evangelicals at this point in chapter 10, that's where they stop. But there's a whole chapter. And if you read the rest of the chapter, you see that it's really talking about something completely different. And so they stop right in the middle, and that's where and that's it.
You just read something out of the Bible that said that Jesus said that everything's okay. Why would one part of the Bible say one thing and one say another?
Well, that was a different translation. I'm just reading you what she actually, I'm taking it directly out of what she had posted. You know, so as a matter of fact, I don't know exactly what translation she was using, but a lot of that was her, she added to that. You know, so it wasn't exactly what the Bible says. When we look at chapter 10, you'll see exactly what that's talking about. And there's no confusion in it, hopefully. And that right there in the middle is where most evangelicals stop, and they don't finish the chapter. And if you read on, you'll find that Peter was given the interpretation of that. Okay, now, God uses dreams and visions, doesn't he? Now, young people, I want you to listen to this and answer this question. Do you remember a king that had a dream he couldn't remember? Thank you. So what happened with Nebuchadnezzar and that dream? It was one he didn't even know, right? So what was he requiring of his wise men in the kingdom as a result of that?
Tell him the dream.
Okay, I'm asking the children, okay?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Okay, and what would happen if they weren't able? Okay. Okay, they would have been punished by death, right? So to avoid this, as a matter of fact, Daniel, when he had heard about this is what he said in Daniel chapter 2, verses 17 through 19. He says, "Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven." So what happened here? Basically, it was after he got together with his companions and they put it to the Lord in prayer. And then the Lord answered the prayer by revealing what that dream was all about. Essentially, the same thing happens with Peter when we get into that. That God has a method where he wants his people to ask of him and then he will reveal. Okay, so anytime we're dealing with a vision or a dream, God is going to give the interpretation. And so God gives dreams and visions, and when his people pray and ask for his mercies, he answers them. But first I want to look at this question of eating those things that God forbids us to eat before we get into that chapter, which to me is just very plain when you start actually read all of it in its context. And so we're going to look at both sides. Now, what is this creature that these people are determined to eat? Now, let's look at the characteristics of that. Now, I've got two statements from the Pen of Inspiration. It's very interesting to me that These statements were made over 100 years ago, and I'm going to read something after that, which is more of a modern day 13 reasons why you shouldn't be eating pork, or you should get away from pork. And basically, when you look at Spirit of Prophecy statements on it 100 years ago, and how they're fulfilled by this other thing, it's just amazing. For want of knowledge, this is the first one, and there's a lot of wisdom in the way that she describes these different things. For want of knowledge and skill in regard to cooking, many a wife and mother daily sets before her family ill-prepared food, which is steadily and surely impairing the digestive organs and making a poor quality of blood. The result is frequent attacks of inflammatory disease and sometimes death. Now, you think she's talking about pork there. She's not. Many a life has been sacrificed by the eating of heavy, sour bread. An instance was related to me of a hired girl who made a batch of such bread. In order to get rid of it and conceal the matter, she threw it to some very large hogs. Next morning, the man of the house found his swine dead, and upon examining the trough, he found pieces of this heavy bread. He made inquiries, and the girl acknowledged what she had done. She had not thought of the effect of such bread upon the swine. If sour, heavy bread will kill swine, and listen to what she says, which can devour rattlesnakes and almost every detestable thing, what effect must it have upon that tender organ, the human stomach? So she's saying some pretty amazing things. She's first of all telling us, this heavy sour bread is not good for human consumption, and it's so bad that it'll kill these hogs, which can eat strychnine and eat rattlesnakes or be bitten by rattlesnakes and won't die. So it's pretty amazing there. And then the second statement is taken from Counsels to the Church. It says, the tissues of the swine swarm with parasites. If the swine, God said, it is unclean unto you, you shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their dead carcass, Deuteronomy 14:8. This command was given because swine's flesh is unfit for food. Swine are scavengers, and this is the only use they were intended to serve. Now, God created the swine, but the purpose was to be a scavenger. So, and if you look at it, and what I'm going to read to you in a little bit, the swine is fearfully and wonderfully made with what it can take. Now, the human body is fearfully and wonderfully made too, but God intended, we have a different system. There, things introduced into our system are, we got to be very careful with that. It's very delicate. Swine are scavengers, and this is the only use they were intended to serve. Never under any circumstances was their flesh to be eaten by human beings. It is impossible for the flesh of any living creature to be wholesome when filth is its natural element and when it feeds upon every detestable thing. Pork, although one of the most common articles of diet, is one of the most injurious. God did not prohibit the Hebrews from eating swine's flesh merely to show his authority. So any of God's commands to us, any of his prohibitions are always for our own good. So it wasn't to exercise his authority, but it was because of, that it was not fit for consumption. But it was not a proper article of food for man. It would fill the system with scrofula, and especially in that warm climate produce leprosy and disease of various kinds. Its influence upon the system in that climate was far more injurious than in a colder climate. Swine's flesh would not be palatable to the taste in its natural state. I don't know if everybody here has just, never tasted any pork or anything like that, but most of the time it's very salty, even bacon, which is most people's favorite, very, very salty. And it has to be because in its natural state you couldn't eat it. Swine flesh would not be palatable to the taste in its natural state. It is made agreeable to the appetite by high seasoning, which makes a very bad thing worse. Swine's flesh, above all other flesh meats, produces a bad state of the blood. Those who eat freely of pork can be but diseased, especially with the fine, sensitive nerves of the brain become enfeebled and so be clouded that sacred things would not be discerned, but be placed upon the low level with common things. Now, when we consider our brothers and sisters in other churches, that eat this on a regular basis. We need to really pray, for these brothers and sisters, and not really judge them.
Is there any like scientific studies backing that it actually impairs your brain in some way?
Well, let me continue to read. I've got, this is a statement. Notice the list of 13 reasons you should not eat pork. Okay, so I found this on the internet, and as a matter of fact, I found many of these principles in different places. And this is how the article reads. Doctors all over the world agree that human consumption of pork is dangerous to their health, yet people all over the world continue to eat pork in large quantities. And then now we have the 13 reasons. First, a pig is real garbage gut. It will eat anything including urine, excrement, dirt, decaying animal flesh, maggots, or decaying vegetables. They will even eat the cancer that grows off other pigs and animals. So right there, tell me, if we eat something that eats that, is that going to benefit our brain? And I'm going to continue on. 2, the meat and fat of a pig absorbs toxins like a sponge. Their meat can be 30 times more toxic than beef or venison. 3, when eating beef or venison, it takes 8 to 9 hours to digest the meat. So what little toxins are in the meat are slowly put into our system and can be filtered by the liver. But when pork is eaten, it takes only 4 hours to digest the meat. We thus get a much higher level of toxins within a shorter time. 4, unlike other mammals, a pig does not sweat or perspire. Perspiration is a means by which toxins are removed from the body. Since a pig does not sweat, the toxins remain within its body and in the meat. 5, pigs and swine are so poisonous that you can hardly kill them with strychnine or other poisons. This is amazing. They're fearfully and wonderfully made, but not for our consumption. 6, farmers will often pen up pigs within a rattlesnake nest because the pigs will eat the snakes, and if bitten, they will not be harmed by the venom. And that's Ellen White made reference to that. 7, when a pig is butchered, worms and insects take to its flesh sooner and faster than to other animals' flesh. In a few days, the swine flesh is full of worms. I know might be a little hard to listen to, but this is real. This is what it's about. This is why this was an abomination. Swine and pigs have over a dozen parasites within them, such as tapeworms, flukes, worms, and trichinae. There is no safe temperature at which pork can be cooked to ensure that all these parasites, their cysts and eggs will be killed. 9, pig meat has twice as much fat as beef. A 3-ounce T-bone steak contains 8.5 grams of fat. A 3-ounce pork chop contains 18 grams, which is over twice as much. And then a beef rib, a 3-ounce beef rib has 11.1 grams of fat. A 3-ounce pork spare rib has 23.2 grams of fat, again, over twice as much. 10, cows have a complex digestive system having 4 stomachs. It thus takes over 24 hours to digest their vegetarian diet, and they are vegetarian. It's interesting that they put that in here. And they're vegetarian, but it takes over 24 hours to digest, causing its food to be purified of toxins. In contrast, the swine's one stomach takes about 4 hours to digest its foul diet, turning its toxic food into flesh. 11, the swine carries about 30 diseases which can be easily passed to humans. This is why God commanded that we are not even to touch their carcass. Ellen White said that the same thing earlier. And 12, the trichina worm of the swine is microscopically small, and once ingested can lodge itself in our intestines, muscles, spinal cord, or the brain. This results in the disease trichinosis. The symptoms are sometimes lacking, but when present, they are mistaken for other diseases such as typhoid, arthritis, rheumatism, gastritis, MS, meningitis, gallbladder trouble, or acute alcoholism. Does anybody know who Michael Simon is? There's a program called the Chew. Yeah, he's one of the super chefs. Well, he's apparently going through this process right now of eliminating things in his body, he's having problems, particularly arthritis. And he's a huge pork eater. I mean, he just loves anything pork related. And I'm just wondering, has he considered the fact that the pork may be one of the blaming causes for his condition? But this is saying that you could have trichinosis, and it could be manifest in all these other symptoms. And then the 13th, the pig is so poisonous and filthy that nature had to prepare him a sewer line or canal running down each leg with an outlet in the bottom of the foot. Out of this hole oozes pus and filth. His body cannot pass into his system fast enough. Some of this pus gets into the meat. So these are pretty horrible things, but these are things that if it's dead, you shouldn't touch it. And this is not fit for human consumption. And again, I think that, that animals fearfully and wonderfully made for the purpose that God made it for, but not for human consumption. So what about Acts chapter 10? Let's get into that, because that's really the most important thing. I just wanted to share with you things about this creature that people just are willing to die to defend that they can eat this, okay? So this is one of the most important events to us as Gentile Christians today. Is there anybody in here that has a Jewish background? Because prior to this event, basically salvation was for the Jews, right? But this brought the Great Commission to the Gentiles, okay, now, and we're all Gentiles. And the reason that we exist today is because of what happened in this chapter, okay? This has nothing to do with food other than an obscure reference to it in this vision. So, now, Cornelius was the first Gentile convert, and Peter had to overcome his prejudice of the Gentiles, whom all Jews believed to be unclean, particularly the rabbis. That's what they pretty much taught. And do you remember how, when Peter was at Joppa, it was through his fervent prayer that God raised the beloved Tabitha, also known as Dorcas, from the dead. This was a miracle that God performed through Peter and through his prayer. Again, prayer was at the center of this, bringing her back to life. And basically from Acts of the Apostles, it said it was when Peter was still at Joppa that he was called by God to take the gospel to Cornelius in Caesarea. Cornelius was a Roman centurion. A lot of this stuff is very interesting when we're going to read the Bible passage in a minute. But here's some kind of background comments here. He was a man of wealth and noble birth, and his position was one of trust and honor. A heathen by birth, training, and education, through contact with the Jews, he had gained a knowledge of God, and he worshipped him with a true heart, showing the sincerity of his faith by compassion to the poor. He was known far and near for his beneficence, and his righteous life made him of good repute among both Jews and Gentiles. His influence was a blessing to all with whom he came in contact. The inspired record describes him as a devout man and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. Believing in God as the creator of heaven and earth, Cornelius revered him, acknowledged his authority, and sought his counsel in all the affairs of life. I mean, it sounds like, he's a really good Christian man, and it was obvious that the Lord, saw this and blessed this man. He was faithful to Jehovah in his home life and in his official duties. He had erected the altar of God in his home, for he dared not attempt to carry out his plans or to bear his responsibilities without the help of God. I mean, do we do this as Seventh-day Adventists? Are we as faithful as Cornelius was? Though Cornelius believed the prophecies and was looking for the Messiah to come, he had not a knowledge of the gospel as revealed in the life and death of Christ. He was not a member of the Jewish church and would have been looked upon by the rabbis as a heathen and unclean. There's that word unclean, very important as we read the chapter. But the same holy watcher who said to Abraham, I know him, knew Cornelius also, and sent a message direct from heaven to him. That's from the Acts of the Apostles. Now, turn, if you will, in your devices or the Bible, to chapter 10. We want to look at this. Actually, this is such an easy reading narrative to me. You can read through this, and if you read the whole chapter, you'll know exactly what it is talking about. There's not any confusion if you read the whole chapter. You don't stop after verse 15. Chapter 10, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, and now it gives a description, a centurion of the band called the Italian band. Now, to me this has significance because the very first convert, where does he come from? The seat of the beast. You know, the Satan's seat. You know, when you think about it, and we were told that there are many, many Catholics that would be converted, or many will be converted, you know, under the three angels' messages. So, you know, we shouldn't think about this in a negative way. The Catholics are some of the ones, probably more Catholics are going to become Seventh-day Adventists than any other group. A devout man and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him and saying unto him, Cornelius. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? And he said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. God had noticed him. And now sent men to Joppa and called for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodgeth with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. And when the angel which spoke unto Cornelius was departed, he called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. And when he had declared all these things unto them, he sent them to Joppa. On the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very hungry. Now, I think it's very interesting. As he is getting ready to see this vision, he gets really hungry. You know, so, you know, hunger, we can be at our weakest point. You know, so anything that might come to us at that point, we might be more susceptible to kind of give in to it. So I think, to me, it's significant that the Bible says he was very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. Now he's hungry. What does he say? But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. Okay, and this is where that's it. You know, this proves God says it's okay now to eat these animals. Okay, but they're not waiting for the interpretation. If you stop here, you're not waiting for the interpretation given by God to Peter. So let's continue on. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven. Now, while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, now, why is he doubting? To me, you know, if this is a vision, wouldn't God have presented it clear enough to where, okay, you know, no, he doubted it. There's a reason he doubted this. Behold, the man which was sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate, and called and asked whether Simon, which was surnamed Peter, were lodged there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, Behold, 3 men seek thee. Arise therefore and get thee down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men which were sent unto him from Cornelius and said, Behold, I am he whom ye seek. What is the cause, therefore, ye are come? And they said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, and one that feareth God, and of good report among all the nations of the Jews, was warned from God by an holy angel to send for thee into this house and to hear the words of thee. So God is building this picture in Peter's mind. What's going on in Peter's mind? He had just seen this vision. He's still concerned about that. What does this mean? And now he's kind of getting in the presence of the servants of Cornelius. And the morrow after they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius waited for them and had called together his kinsmen and near friends. And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter stood him up, saying, Stand up, I myself also am a man. Now I want to interject one thing here. This is just a little sidebar in a sense. If Peter really was a saint and a vicar, why would he declare himself also a man not to be worshipped? So here, if you want to show evidence that Peter never claimed what some churches claim he is, here is direct evidence for that. Verse 27, And as he talked with him, he went in and found many that were come together, and he said unto them, now here is the answer to the vision. And he said unto them, Ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So this vision, which was a picture of these abominable creatures, people want to say, well, now we can eat these things. But there's no evidence in the whole thing. The whole thing points to his attitude toward the Gentiles, toward Cornelius and the Gentiles. And this was a breakthrough for Peter, because now he realized that the gospel was extended to all the world, not just the Jews. And then Peter opened his mouth, verse 34, and then Peter opened his mouth and said, Of a truth I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. The word which God sent unto the children of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all. And then what you read in the scripture reading, and Peter preached to him about the gospel of Jesus' life, which is something Cornelius had never heard before. His life, death, and resurrection, salvation to everyone who believes. And in verse 44 it says, While Peter yet spake these words, the Holy Ghost fell on all them which heard the word, and they of the circumcision which believed were astonished, as many as came with Peter, because that on the Gentiles also was poured out the gift of the Holy Ghost. So here's biblical evidence that this is where the gospel basically came to the Gentiles. So this chapter is about us and where we are today, the fact that that salvation has come to us, and this was the first instance of that. Now, in closing, in Ellen White's comments, she doesn't deal with the controversy we see today regarding unclean foods, because that's not what this chapter is about. I tried to find statements where she might have kind of dealt with that vision, and she really has very little to say about that. It's really more about Cornelius and Peter in the meeting and how the angels brought the two together. And so in this closing statement, we find some very important lessons and principles regarding this chapter in the history of the opening of the gospel to all kindreds, tongues, and people. Very interesting statement here. It's found in SDA Bible Commentary, and this is the closing statement. But I want you to listen to this. Here we are given positive evidence that the Lord does not leave in darkness those who follow all the light given them, but sends his angels to communicate with them. Cornelius was living in accordance with the instruction given in the Old Testament scriptures, and the Lord sent a messenger to tell him what to do. God could have given Cornelius all the instruction he needed by the angel. Now this is very important. But this was not his plan. His purpose was to place Cornelius in connection with those who had been receiving knowledge from on high, whose work it was to impart this knowledge to those seeking for light. Thus, God always deals with his people. So it's not going to be an angel in heaven that's going to, give this message. God has extended. We are the ones that, if we are studying this and in order to teach other people, that's how God works. People that are seeking the truth, he puts together with those that are teaching the truth. Okay, and that's what happened with Peter and Cornelius. Cornelius obeyed the instruction given. He united with the church and became a useful and influential laborer together with God. The angel did not give him the light that he might have given him, but directed him to take a course whereby he might come into connection with one who could tell him precious truth. And then this last paragraph here. There are many today who are in the same position as Cornelius. They are living up to the light they have received, and God speaks to them as he spoke to Cornelius. They are living up to the light. They are living up to the light they have received, and God speaks to them as he spoke to Cornelius and brings them by his appointed agencies to the place where they will receive the truth into good and honest hearts. God reveals himself as to those who are striving to form characters that he can approve. The prayers of those who fear him, who recognize their obligations to him, are heard and answered. The Lord takes special notice of those who walk in the light that he has given them, who testify by their deeds that they are trying to honor God. Through a Peter, in a sense, we're like Peter, and if we have a knowledge to teach, so we're Peter in this scenario. Through a Peter, he will present the pearl of great price, and through a Cornelius and his family, many souls will be brought into the light. So my question to us is, are we in a position to be Peters to this world, where God can call on us to meet a person that's searching for truth? That's the question we need to think about this morning. May God bless us. And our closing hymn is hymn number